Hi, my name is Alex with Ape Tech Tutorials, and today we're going to be talking about Scrumfall. This is for organizations that are trying to do Scrum, but deep down, they're still kind of a waterfall organization. If this is you, you're going to really want to pay attention to this video because I've been seeing this for the last 12 to 13 years of my experience as an Agile practitioner, and I think I have a solution for you. I think I have a way for you to effectively use Jira to essentially be Scrumfall. Make sure you subscribe, drop a like if you get value out of this video, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in the comment section below. Let's jump into my whiteboarding tool before we jump into Jira, but we're going to be explaining what's the phenomenon, and then I'm going to show you how I deal with it in Jira. Let's jump into it. Okay, so I'm going to be on my iPad here, and I'm actually going to be describing Scrumfall first, and then we're going to basically jump into Jira. So the way I see Scrumfall, the way I've seen teams do it, is we have our sprint, and you have basically your sprint one. And then you have two teams that are in this sprint. We have our developers, and then we have our QA team. So this method is really most evident in organizations that have a dedicated dev team that is writing code. They're still doing unit testing. They're still doing some light testing at the developer level, but then they kind of pass the baton over to like a dedicated QA team or dedicated testing team. And this is kind of where being Scrum and practicing Agile, but also having real consequences of shipping bad software or bad code has a real negative impact. So those kind of organizations that maybe they're in a regulated industry or something of that nature, where you must get a stamp of final approval saying this thing isn't going to blow up, it's hard to practice Scrum because of the 2-week cadence or even the whatever sprint cadence you have. It just becomes very challenging because you have this development team that's like constantly putting out code, but then you have a QA team that is very slow to response because they have to cross their T's and dot their I's appropriately. So I think I finally figured out a way to give credit to the developers, let them be agile, let them run with their sprints, but then make it possible so that the QA team can also use Jira and also provide feedback in the form of bugs, but not be disruptive and not be the bottleneck for your team. So if this is something that you've been experiencing, watch this. This is something that I kind of just came up with, and hopefully it works for you. So anyways, well, we have the dev team. The dev team, during that sprint, they're going to be basically creating code, okay? Their job is to write code during this time frame. And then we have the QA team. The QA team during sprint one is typically not doing much other than writing test cases. And I do apologize, this is going to be a little bit different. I didn't think this all the way through, but I can't write and talk at the same time. So let's see how this goes. Anyway, so that's sprint one, right? So I think sprint one's pretty clear. The developers are writing some code, and then your QA is essentially writing the test cases that they're going to be using to essentially validate the code as soon as they get a build. So anyways, that's sprint one. So at the end of sprint one, we do have a build, right? And that build is going to be given over to the QA team. So guess what the QA team is going to be working on during sprint two? So during sprint two, the QA team is validating that build one, right? Because the developers have finished it at this point, and they've essentially tossed the baton over to the QA team to essentially go and say, hey, we finished all this section of code. Can you go and verify and make sure that it's good? And so the QA team is going to go do that. But what's the dev team working on at this point, right? So the dev team, they're working on creating code, right? They're working on the next set of stories, the next set of issues that are in their backlog, and they basically keep going sprint after sprint, right? But where we get problems, where things start getting a little bit complicated, is usually around here. So I'm going to actually change colors here so I can kind of illustrate some points, right? So at the end of sprint two, we're going to get a build two, and this story keeps going, right? So now QA is going to validate build two, right? So that will continue to go. And this is kind of where the Scrumfall goes, because your team, your software developers are working on code continuously, right? Because during sprint three, your developers are going to do yet again more code, right? More code, but your QA might have not finished that build. They might have not finished validating. They might have had roadblocks. They might not have the right environment. they might just not be ready to receive yet another build. And so things start kind of piling up and getting backlogged. Now, the reason this is important is because in Jira, the way teams usually execute this is they will have one giant continuous workflow that includes the UAT, that includes integration testing, whatever kind of testing they want to do. But your developers can't take credit in Jira because the issue has to stay open, because it's not done until all of it's done, until it's been validated, right? And so if you find yourself in that situation where you're not able to give your team credit because your developers are finished with their code, they finished their commitment, but your QA team is kind of lagging behind, and it's not by any fault of the QA team, it's just the inherent nature of the beast that sometimes it takes time to validate your software and to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. And so if you're finding yourself in the situation where, how do I let my QA team kind of have some autonomy, but also not bottleneck my developers, this video is going to be amazing for you. So let me show you how I solved this in Jira, okay? And so we're gonna jump into Jira, and I'm essentially going to take a workflow, and I'm gonna kind of just add a couple things here to this workflow. So this is just a workflow that I have for one of my projects. Nothing special here, it's just part of my JSD project. And so typically what I usually have for my teams, right? My teams are gonna have like a code complete, right? There's gonna be like a code complete status. Then there's gonna be a peer review status, right? And so we can automatically, as soon as the code's complete, we can open up the PR. So we have like a code review status. And in the code review, this includes automated builds. This includes anything that you have going on with your CI/CD, with your GitHub, with having the PRs. This includes all of that. So in this section here, whoa, I somehow got myself out of this. In this section of the code here, or of the process, we are essentially creating this environment where your developers are doing the right thing. They're being agile, they're being responsible, and they're doing their part of the job of making sure they're putting out high quality code, right? So once we have the code reviewed, we have basically another situation. We're like, okay, so now that we have this, we need to now do like some formal testing, right? So some organizations are gonna have like ready for QA, right? And so when we do this, when we have this like ready for QA, this is kind of where my method is really going to shine, because it's ready for QA, right? We can have it in QA or in testing, whatever you want to call it here. So we can have all these extra statuses, and I really should have had these already ready, but I think I kind of like that I'm building this out with you, and so you're following along. And so essentially the point I'm trying to make here is we have all the statuses that belong to the developers for the developer part of the lifecycle. But then we also have statuses that are going to belong to the QA team, where they're going to own that. And these two teams need to talk to each other, and they're usually not on the same board, mainly because you don't want the QA team, who's going to be always a lag, because they're always going to be behind one sprint. You don't want them to be a bottleneck to your team, right? But so I'm going to show you basically how to fix this, right? And so then finally we have like done, right? Assuming QA passed everything, it'll go to done. But the windows of opportunity are different. The developers are on a 2-week cycle. QA might not necessarily be on that same cycle. So anyways, we're going to publish this, and I'm going to show you essentially how I built this out in Jira so that this works perfectly for your team, okay? So same workflow, and I'm just going to re-show you the diagram, right? Same workflow, but we have all the development part, which is this top part. Then we have the QA part, which is at the bottom. Once QA says, yep, we're all good, then it moves to done, right? So anyways, taking that as an assumption, we have a board, and I'm going to have this regular board, and I'm just going to add these new statuses. Now this JSD board is going to be the board that I use for my software development. So I'm going to add a column for code complete. You remember we created that status, so I'm going to add that one there. And I'm going to add my status for code review. Okay. Now this is where the controversial part is. This is where I kind of think I figured something out that's very subtle yet very elegant. And instead of moving the item all the way to the done resolution, I'm moving this out, and I'm going to put a ready for QA. Okay. Now I am going to leave the name done here because it's done from a developer standpoint. So I don't want them to get confused, right? But I am going to set this done to be the first status of the baton passing. And so let me show you what that's going to look like. So for the QA team, because they don't need to work and operate out of sprints, I'm going to just make a Kanban board for them. And I'm going to do basically call it the QA board. I'm still going to create it within the same JSD project. And I'm going to hit create here, but I'm going to alter the statuses. So instead of showing all the statuses, right, instead of showing the to do and all this, I'm going to still leave to do, in progress, and done, because from a QA perspective, they're going to be fine, right? They're still going to have, okay, so here's all the stuff I have to do. Here's all the stuff that we're working on. And here's all the stuff that we're done. And so what we can do here is I'm just going to kick these out, and I'm going to get rid of in progress, code review, code complete. But here's the kicker. If you're not paying attention, watch this. Ready for QA, I'm going to make this my to-do. If you remember from the last board, the software board, this is my status of done on the software team, on the software board. So on the QA board, this now becomes my step 1. And so as you can visualize, the developer is essentially passing off the baton, right? This is where my baton, the developer is going, I'm done with my part. I've checked all my stuff. Here you go, QA, you go. And now QA is going to receive it and take ownership and then run with it from there. Okay. So this allows for that transition to happen. So we're just going to have ready for QA to be the to-do, QA's to-do. Their in progress is in QA, and you could rename in progress to in QA. I'm just not going to touch it. And now when QA says, you know what, we're done. This is all good. Everything's great. This thing's not going to blow up. Now we can mark it as done. And so that's essentially how we're setting this up. And now I'm going to show you like a brief demo, right? So I'm going to actually switch because the lifecycle starts at the developer level. So I'm just going to take thing 2. The developer is going to move it to in progress. This is where they're opening up their commits, their branch. They're basically doing whatever your developers do. And so this part right here, very, very developer centric. They're going to say, you know what, code's complete. We're ready for a PR. A PR will open up. Then it will automatically move to code review. This is where you're kicking off your CI/CD builds and your code smells and everything and all that good stuff. All that's happening. And then the developer is going to move it to done. This is very important because now when I move it to done, you'll notice it's not resolved. The issue isn't resolved in Jira. But these 8 points, if I were to complete the sprint, watch these 8 points. When I hit complete, look, I'm getting credit. 1 issue's done, 2 is incomplete. I have 2 incomplete, 1 issue done. Jira's actually giving me credit. And when I actually close it, when I actually close sprint 5 here, my thing dropped by 8 points because look, I got 8 points worth of credit for my completed issues. So this is good. This is really, really good because Jira is giving my developers credit for the work that they did. And I don't have to worry about basically not getting credit from the software developer standpoint, right? But where this thing's really, really shining now is if I switch over to the QA board, because they're on a Kanban style, they now have thing 2, it entered their to-do, right? So it's in my done status for the developer board, but in the QA board is now in my to-do. And now my QA can move it to their in progress, which is in QA. You'll notice that this is now in QA. And then, and only when QA basically says, you know what, this is good, we are everything checked out, we will move it to done. Or if it doesn't go well and they're like, no, this doesn't work, well, guess what? Now they can create a bug, they can link an issue, they can create one, they can block, they can do a blocks, and then they can create a bug and then link it together. And then guess what? They can put that bug on the backlog for the developer team to essentially fix it. They can hold this task here because there's a bug open against it, but they don't have to close it because they're in a Kanban style. And so they're not impacting the metrics of your development team, but the developers are just going to receive a bug. They're going to plan it into their next sprint and they're going to fix it. But they don't have to do all this mumbo jumbo of like, oh my gosh, we're not getting the right credit, the baton, we got to send it back, we got to send it forward. Like all that stuff kind of just goes away. And now your task just became your placeholder for until that bug is finished. Then they can recheck it. They can redo whatever they're going to do. They can bring in this bug over here into the QA board and then test everything again. And then once everything looks good, then we can move it all to done. And then once it's all done, you can release it and you can formally say, this is QA's a formal release of this version, or you can do whatever you want to do here. But anyways, this is how I would recommend you use Scrumfall or implement Scrumfall if you've been struggling with trying to give the right team the right credit and make sure that the baton passing is happening appropriately. Anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I know this is an interesting video. It's not typically the style of videos that I do, but I wanted to share this because this technique to me is very important, and I think it'll help you and your team out. So anyways, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, share this video. If you're working with another Scrumfall team, or maybe you're doing Scrum but is another way I've heard it, right? But share it with anybody who you think might get value out of this, and I will see you in the next one.